Thanks, Peter, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to participate. These are my views, and I appreciate the opportunity. I feel doubly challenged. First, I'm a regulator talking after lunch, a perilous thing to be sure. And second, I think we've had a tremendous discussion this morning about the many flavors of harmonization convergence that are going on throughout the world. So as I sat and thought about what I might talk about today, I wanted to avoid duplicating the many tremendous things that we've heard about this morning. But I did want to talk just a little bit about some of the activities that I see going on in harmonization that are interesting and slightly different than those that we have discussed to now. I also wanted to just talk a little bit about what it means to be a regulator supporting harmonization, and I'll come back to that theme in the middle part of my talk. And then I'll end with some ideas that I think that we need to do as regulators to help continue to make the progress that we're all looking to make around harmonization. But there is an obligate, beginning with why I believe there is value to harmonization. I will not dwell on this. This is my own hierarchy of why it is useful for harmonization, why it really is something that we need to continue to make progress on. My central points are, one, harmonization is occurring. It's focused on a wide range of activities, from policies to technical standard setting, and we need to keep in mind that whole array of activities as we think about harmonization. Second, we need to keep in mind the various people and parties that are coming to the table around harmonization. Each one of our groups brings skill sets, resources, needs, values to the table that are going to influence whether or not the harmonization is going to be successful, whether it's going to be easy, whether it's going to be time-consuming and the like. And then finally, regulators, as one of those partners, have their own particular roles, I believe an important role to play in moving harmonization forward. So it is, first and foremost, a priority for my center and for the Food and Drug Administration. This is just a quote from Dr. Hamburg saying that we recognize that successfully protecting U.S. public policy, we must think, act, and engage globally. Our interests must be broader than simply those within our own borders. And the box reminds us of many of the activities that we have going on within the FDA, activities that my center supports to build harmonized efforts across the region and across the globe. Many examples of ongoing harmonization. I'm going to walk through these very quickly. My reason for choosing the ones I did are because I believe they illustrate slightly different kinds of harmonization than we've talked about this morning. So, ICH. We have tremendous amounts of information about ICH. One thing that I think is worth remembering about ICH is that it covers a wide array of harmonization efforts. There are efforts dedicated at regulatory policymaking, fairly high-level documents, if you will. For instance, the E1 document, clinical exposure needs for safety evaluation. It also includes technical or incredibly technical standard setting development, and the two examples I have here are the Q7A for GMPs, and the Q4B Annex, which is a document that I recently had an opportunity to review, on bulk density and tapped density of powders, general chapter. If that isn't specific, I don't know what is. But pulling back just a bit from that, we've also, the ICH has provided standards that have made a difference. This morning there were some questions about metrics of success. Are there standards that we can point to that we've done assessments and understand their values? I would say the Common Technical Document is one of those standards. Teresa Mullen is in the back of the room, can talk about the analyses we've done. That is a standard that ICH put together and that is in fact making a meaningful difference. And I think we've done those analyses and can talk if necessary. So my short answer is the harmonization efforts through ICH have led to broad success, I believe. PICAS, another harmonization effort, Pharmaceuticals Inspection Convention and Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperation Scheme, targeted at harmonization around inspections. And you can see here, one of 40 regulatory agencies, the FDA is now able to share GMP information in ways that we had not previously been able to do. This kind of a harmonization effort leads to reduced resource needs better information sharing, and I think ultimately better patient safety and harmonization of inspectional standards. VXDS, Voluntary Exploratory Data Submissions Meetings. So this is something that was set up between the EMA and the FDA to address a problem that industry brought to our agencies. They asked us, how are you going to acquire the scientific expertise to regulate new products that require science on the cutting edge? Pharmacogenomics, metabolomics, antisense RNA technologies. What's your mechanism for making sure you understand those things well enough so that when we bring a dossier to you, your first response is, I don't know what to do with this and I'm going to be conservative? How do you get beyond that response? The answer was the VXDS meetings, voluntary data standards meetings. These meetings are non-regulatory in nature, sponsor-driven, commonly tied around an individual application. The sponsor is allowed to ask us literally any question. The question may be, would you approve this product? Because the results of the meeting are not binding in a regulatory way. So they're an opportunity for EMA and FDA to sit down around new science and new scientific issues tied to specific products in some cases, and understand that science better than we did previously, so that when it does come into us for regulatory action, we're going to be familiar with the science. We're going to understand how to incorporate it into our regulatory thinking, and ideally that's going to help mitigate the sort of typical conservatism when you don't know how to approach a problem. The gain is obviously then increased regulatory experience and expertise in new sciences. We've had over 50 meetings of these to date. My own experience is that they have been wildly successful in their goal, which is to increase our capacity to regulate new sciences. And then my last example is the CEDAR Forum for International Drug Authorities. This is in the rubric of capacity building. So we've heard today about the need to exchange information about regulatory structures, and there are a number of different kinds of regulatory structures. This forum, founded by the CEDAR staff under Justina Molzone, hosts international regulators interested in learning about how the FDA's regulatory structures work. We've had 15 meetings since 2005. You can see the numbers on the screen. Focus has often been on good clinical practices, on manufacturing quality and the like. The idea being sharing information, experiences from my review staff to regulators interested in understanding it better than they do. And the harmonization gain then is, of course, not just capacity building, but it's also collegial interaction. So you're building relationships between regulators in different parts of the international world. Something that we've not talked about much today, but is a terribly important part of making sure that we're working together in terms of harmonized regulation. So about that harmonized regulation and about the parties that are coming to the table to do it. What I want to do is just talk through the three groups that I see those parties falling into. My point that I'd like to make is that depending on which group you're in, you have different needs. You have fundamentally, you have different needs and different interests in a harmonization effort. And so that as a part of a harmonization discussion, we need to keep that in mind to understand how best to proceed. So if you are working in North America, in the developed, and I mean developed in a regulatory sense world, we're interested in regulatory harmonization to support efficient discovery, development, and production, as well as all of the things that we talked about at the beginning. This drives interests like interests in harmonization and efforts in new development areas. Consistent guidance so that industry is able to efficiently develop products, and transparent decision-making and communications. By contrast, or in addition, if you come from a region that is not yet developed in a regulatory sense, you'll be interested in those things, and in addition, I would expect interested in regulatory models to support their own regulatory capacity building, and a broader integration of your own experience and your own regulatory structures into the world's harmonized regulatory structures. You want to be in that participation, in that conversation, part of that discussion. That, I believe, drives additional interests in technical support for building capacity and global engagement, interested in the many things that we heard this morning about the harmonized discussions going on, to be a part of those, to be part of the harmonized efforts globally. And then the third, maybe overarching bucket, the governments, the non-governmental organizations, the patients worldwide that in some senses pay our bills, are focused on health outcomes. They want to make sure that whatever we do in a harmonized sense matters, makes a difference to human life and human outcomes. They're then interested in timely access to high quality medicines, making certain that what we do results in quality medicines at reasonable costs, efficiently produced. Supply chain disruption, counterfeiting, the report that came out today, manufacturing quality, those things are of particular interest then to that third group. My point is, all three of those groups are going to be bringing different interests, different needs, different expectations to the table as we think about a harmonized effort. You can also break the groups into other ways. Pharmaceutical industry, regulators, regulations, non-governmental organizations, each of them bring their own unique skills, needs, goals, resources. It gets easy to understand why people are pessimistic about the capacity of us to harmonize. You look at all of the challenges here, all the differences in terms of expectations, social structures, laws. You could be pessimistic. I am not pessimistic, but you can understand the challenges before us. So what is a regulator to do in a space that's as complicated as all of that? What is the role of a regulator to help that along? The first question, I guess, is just first and foremost, is there a role for a regulator in helping that along? You could argue that a regulator is paid by a given government, that in fact their focus should be within the boundaries of that country. Obviously, I'm not making that. I think there is a much broader obligation on the regulator. It begins with an understanding of the unique role that the regulator plays. We do have an obligation, a legal role in application of regulations and law. We also have an equally important focus on public health missions. Each one of the regulatory bodies that that all have obligations in the public health space. We are also in a unique position to see needs, to see opportunities, to understand better what changes might make the most sense, might make the largest impacts in terms of greater efficiency in medical products development. I think we have an identified obligation in that sense to support improved regulation globally. But don't take my word for it. Take the word of Peter Barton Hutt, who I will tell you I did not know was coming to this meeting today. So Peter, in 1980, said that regulators had 5 obligations. Now, he was speaking, I believe, largely about the U.S., but I think they apply internationally. He can comment later on if he'd like. We have these 3 obligations as regulators. I think we all have these same obligations: protecting the public from harm, preserving maximum individual freedom of choice, guaranteed meaningful public participation, promoting consistent and dependable rules that are equally applicable to everyone, and providing prompt decisions on all issues that arise in a regulatory context. I think you could take these and think about them in an international way as obligations sort of beholden for all of the regulators in the room. How do I interpret them? How do I translate them in terms of what we do? I think you start out saying our role is to provide clarity on the rules in operation and how they'll be interpreted. Those are standards, those are rules, they are guidances. We ensure a level playing field. Whether it's a level playing field within a nation or it's a level playing field internationally, we need to provide process transparency. We've talked a great deal about process today already. Access, equity, and timeliness. And I like Peter's words: consistent, dependable rules that are equally applicable to everyone. That is the heart of harmonization from my perspective, if by everyone you mean worldwide to the extent that's possible. And then the last piece is something that the FDA and CEDAR in particular takes very seriously: providing thoughtful and informed regulation that does not stifle innovation. So what does that mean operationally? From my perspective, it starts with collaboration. We are in a collaborative world. Interdependence is the reality. The notion that that shouldn't be a central tool in harmonization efforts, I don't think we're going to be successful if we move away from a collaborative model. We have to acknowledge that differences exist between regulators, between regulations, between needs, between values, which we've not talked a great deal about, but obviously differ between both people and regions. We need to find ways to build opportunities to harmonize existing knowledge databases and standards. People have said that over and over today. I couldn't agree more. And then lastly, and touching values just a little bit, we have to be prepared to question our own assumptions. If they no longer hold, they need to be abandoned. And I think that's at the heart of harmonization, is asking a regulatory agency, a regulatory region, to ask whether the rules still apply, or whether there are other ways, other models from other parts of the world or other non-governmental spaces that would work equally well, maybe more efficiently, that we should adopt. I'm going to end by just concluding that I will say the benefits of harmonization are unequivocal for me and broadly acknowledged. I believe we are making progress on a broad range of regulatory harmonization efforts, the large-scale harmonization efforts that have been talked about today, and some of the smaller harmonization efforts, building interpersonal relationships, technical standards, and things that are long-term going to be terribly important. I think regulators have a very well-defined role to play here. It's unquestionable that we have an obligation to be involved in international harmonization in a meaningful way. We need to do that with the recognition that we should look for ways to share and not the alternative. And I'll end with one of my favorite quotes about being a regulator, which is to walk that tension between preserving order amid change and preserving change amid order. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug, for a great talk. I want to just remind folks from the agenda, we don't have an opportunity in this particular section to directly ask questions, but I'm sure Doug and Vincent will be very pleased to talk to you out in the hall and maybe bring them into the discussion later on. Our next speaker is Vincent Ahanka. He's the Deputy Director, Regulatory Affairs for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We're really happy that he agreed to join us today.